when you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. But life, that's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. And the minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out the other side, that you can change it, you can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it, versus embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it. I think that's very important. And however you learn that, once you learn it, you'll want to change life and make it better, because it's kind of messed up in a lot of ways. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
Even years after his passing, Steve Jobs continues to fascinate the world. He very much lived by his own advice, always holding a deep belief in his ability to influence the world around him, which led him to actually go on to revolutionize human society multiple times during the course of his lifetime, spearheading the personal computer revolution, establishing computer animation as a respected art form via Pixar, transforming the music industry via the iPod and iTunes, and then ushering in the worldwide mobile wave. His legacy remains a continual source of inspiration for countless young entrepreneurs in every nation across the globe, and even many of the current rock star entrepreneurs on the world stage today, including Michael Saylor and Elon Musk.
Well, I did try to talk to him once at a party, and he was super rude to me. But I don't think it was me. I think it was sort of, off the course.
I think you weren't the first.
Yeah, not the first, no. It was, yeah, and I was actually there with, Larry Page is an old friend of mine. I've known Larry since before he got venture funding for Google, and Larry was the guy that introduced me to Steve Jobs. So it's not as like I'm going and tugging on his coat, please talk to me. But, so I was introduced by Larry Page. It's not bad. So, he obviously was an incredible guy and made fantastic products. And I don't know, there was like a certain the guy had a certain magic about him. Just sort of. That was really inspiring. So, I think that's really great.
Is there that magic that you try and emulate?
No, I think Steve Jobs is way cooler than I am. So,
what was it about him that draws such intense perpetual interest from people the world over, people from vastly different walks of life and cultures? What was this unique magic that Elon Musk spoke about? Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak co-founded Apple Computer in 1977, and today it is one of the most valuable companies on Earth. It was their unique synergy that birthed a company that would go on to change the world and our very society many times over. Steve Wozniak is a technical genius whose contributions are frequently overlooked and were absolutely essential to Apple's success during the first decade, and he is credited as being the engineering mind behind the highly successful Apple I and Apple II. Furthermore, today, he is as much respected for his philanthropy and big heart as he is for his technical brilliance. Steve Jobs did not have the same level of engineering or technical knowledge as Wozniak. Yet he was absolutely critical for Apple's initial success, and especially during its later renaissance, in a much different way. Most of the world remembers him as the master businessman and marketer behind Apple, but he was more than that. He was the artist and dreamer behind Apple. A number of documentaries and movies have been made about the tumultuous life of Steve Jobs, and he of course has his critics and detractors who focus on his less flattering character traits, especially the ones he was known for during his early years. But I want to focus on something else entirely. I want to focus on his tremendously unique and brilliant mind, and explore the nature of his genius and what we can all learn from his methods of thinking, whether you are an entrepreneur, artist, or business person yourself, or just someone who is fascinated by his legacy and the Apple brand. Steve Jobs epitomized his famous "Think Different" slogan in every way. He led a computer and technology company, and yet he was a man who was far more focused on design, aesthetics, and user experience rather than on hardware and specs. He was a college dropout who never finished his degree, and yet he was one of the savviest businessmen of modern history and managed his company far different and more effectively than those with MBAs from prestigious universities. He designed the most incredible products that changed the very fabric of modern society, yet he never asked customers for what they wanted. He somehow knew what people wanted. He was tremendously intelligent, yet he was not a boring nerd like Bill Gates. He had a high capacity for logic, yet he relied predominantly upon his intuition. In the next chapters, let's delve further into all the unique aspects of his genius and discover what we can all learn from his ways of thinking. Though many skeptics of the world frequently scoff at the mindset of doing what you love and following your passion, it was certainly a sentiment that Steve Jobs deeply believed in and personally followed, and it helped make him one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jobs is that money was never his primary motivator. He did it because he had an immense passion for the products he was creating.
I started the company with Steve Wozniak in my parents' garage, 20 years ago, and over 22 years ago. And so there's a definite place in my heart for this. I'm drawing a salary of, I think, $1 per year. So I hope I'm not burdening the shareholders too much, and I very much want to see Apple get turned around, and I think it's gonna.
He would call me up and say, "Larry, let's get together." We saw each other a lot. He'd come over to my house. I'd go over to his house. I said, "Steve, I'm not coming over if you make me watch Toy Story again." I've watched 73 different versions of Toy Story. Now, I know the new version of Render Man is 4% better than the one I saw last week, but I'm not watching this thing again. So, Larry, you got to see. You won't believe the different the shadows look. I don't care. You don't understand. I'm not coming unless you promise me that you're not going to make me watch. I promise, but just a little of it.
In fact, in many ways, he actually viewed himself as a rebel artist, and as a young man was very much wary of massive bureaucratic corporations like IBM. As his biographer, Walter Isaacson, put it, throughout his career, Jobs liked to see himself as an enlightened rebel pitted against evil empires, a Jedi warrior, or a Buddhist samurai fighting the forces of darkness. IBM was his perfect foil. Ironically, this mindset actually led him to much greater financial success than the multitudes of businessmen who solely focus on the balance sheet, and his own unique value system led him to build the most valuable company in the world. Of course, he explained the power of this mindset during his now iconic Stanford graduation speech.
But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference. You've got to find what you love, and that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking, don't settle.
When you love what you do, that passion tends to permeate into every aspect of your work, which sets it far above the competition, especially if your competitors are just going through the motions and doing it for monetary rewards, rather than fulfilling a higher purpose. When studying the products that Steve Jobs was involved in developing, one can instantly sense that there is more to the product than just excellent design. And one can almost feel the immense care, attention to detail, and thought that went into each product, even the parts that most people will never see.
He used to joke that the lunatics had taken over the asylum as we shared a giddy excitement, spending months and months working on a part of a product that nobody would ever see, well, not with their eyes. But we did it because we really believed that it was right, because we cared. He believed that there was a gravity, almost a sense of civic responsibility, to care way beyond any sort of functional imperative.
As Jobs said, in his own words, during his final years, "My passion has been to build an enduring company where people were motivated to make great products. Everything else was secondary. Sure, it was great to make a profit because that was what allowed you to make great products. But the products, not the profits, were the motivation. Many Silicon Valley startups today have an entirely different mentality and view their companies as a quick way to secure funding from venture capitalists, creating a vehicle they hope to cash out of in a few years. Jobs' approach was absolutely antithetical to this. He had overwhelming love for both Apple and Pixar, and this passion and energy is what blossomed them into two of the most revered brands on Earth. These were the opposite of short-term vehicles created solely for money. They were lifelong passion projects, and he put in every effort to ensure that they would have enduring legacies that far outlived him. Of course, in the game of life, following the passion in your heart is something far easier said than done. We live in a society that is, on the whole, practical and profit-driven rather than romantic and idealistic. Thus, following your heart in our modern world is not nearly as easy as it sounds. It actually takes immense courage and faith, and luckily for Jobs, they were both qualities that he had in spades. Most of the major decisions that Jobs made by following his heart were unconventional to say the least, and I'm certain that many of his peers found many of them to be outright bizarre by ordinary standards. While today, everyone of course celebrates the founding of Apple as the quintessential entrepreneurial success story, the trillion-dollar company started by two idealistic kids working out of a garage. However, it must be kept in mind that no one thought so at the time. Computers were hulking mainframes meant only for large companies, and the idea that every household would one day own a computer seemed preposterous at the time, even to so-called business experts and professional investors. Yet both Jobs and Wozniak had a deep passion for personal computers and had a vision for their future potential, and by bravely following this passion, embracing the risks, ignoring the naysayers, uncertain of where it would eventually lead, these two young men went on to eventually change our entire society. Yet another example was when he bought and nurtured Pixar Animation Studios. For an entire decade, he continued to pour millions upon millions of dollars of his own money into the company as it was continually losing money year after year, even when many of the famous business people around him saw zero value in this new art form and called it a passing fad and a gimmick. Yet in spite of this, Jobs persevered because he sincerely believed in the potential of computer animation to become a great art form. Following your heart is an oft-repeated and pleasant-sounding platitude, yet it is immensely difficult to actually put in practice. This is because the callings of your heart will likely lead you far away from the masses, and hence you will face a great deal of judgment, perhaps even ostracization, and you will have to face your own personal doubts as well. Perhaps in your own life, you don't want to start a computer company or animation studio like Jobs did, but perhaps you want to start a business in the area of your own passion, such as a restaurant or consulting firm. Or perhaps you want to study to become a physician when no one else in your family has gone on to higher education. It's certainly not an easy road, and you may face a lot of resistance and naysaying from those around you. But, as in the example of Steve Jobs' life, it is absolutely worth it to muster the courage and strength to be true to your own heart, because doing so is how you become the person you are always meant to be. Very likely, you will not understand the big picture until you look backwards, many years from now, as the heart can have wisdom that transcends the logical mind.
Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary.
It is widely known that Jobs was deeply spiritual and that Eastern philosophy and spirituality were immensely important to him. His passion in this area is what led him to undertake a spiritual journey to India when he was a young man. However, his fascination with Eastern spirituality continued for the remainder of his life, and his favorite book was the autobiography of a yogi, which he read at least once per year and was loaded onto his personal iPad. And he and his wife were even married by a Zen Buddhist monk. Though his lifelong dedication to studying Zen Buddhism did little to lessen his famous temper and brash attitude, his studies did provide him with the exceptional ability to focus that was peerless in even the highest levels of the business world.
He had a single-mindedness and an attention to detail, unlike anyone I've ever seen.
Yeah, you know, we try to hire really smart people, but we have a very simple organization, and we try to focus and do very few things well. And focusing's hard because focusing doesn't mean saying yes, it means saying no. So we decide not to do a lot of things so we can focus on a few handfuls of things and do them well.
In the highly digitized modern world, we often face a lot of pressure to take on a number of responsibilities and engage in endless multitasking. In fact, in modern culture, more is often seen as better. However, Jobs understood that in many cases, greatness is achieved by saying no and ridding yourself of the unessential. An excellent example of this is when Steve Jobs returned to Apple when it was on the brink of bankruptcy and began the Herculean task of revitalizing and restoring the deeply troubled company. Apple at the time had an endless array of products, most of which were mediocre.
So we started with the product line. We looked at the product roadmap going out for a few years, and we said a lot of this doesn't make sense, and it's way too much stuff, and there's not enough focus. And so we actually got rid of 70% of the stuff on the product roadmap. I mean, I couldn't even figure out the damn product line after a few weeks. I kept saying, well, what is this model? How does this fit? And I started talking to customers, and they couldn't figure it out either. And so you're going to see the product line get much simpler, and you're going to see the product line get much better. And there's some new stuff coming out that's incredibly nice. In addition, we've been able to focus a lot more on the 30% of the gems and add some new stuff in that is going to take us in some whole new directions.
Jobs eliminated the vast majority of these products and pared the entire corporation's offerings down to a highly simplified grid of only 4 products. Even today, Tim Cook remains very much aware of the power of a simple and focused product line after years of mentorship from Jobs. Apple's product line now includes a few more major categories, like AirPods and the Apple Watch. However, the legacy of Steve Jobs lives on, in that the largest corporation on Earth offers fewer than 10 major product categories and strives to do each one very well, rather than offering a huge array of average products. Also, on the topic of spirituality, Steve Jobs was also famous for employing a reality distortion field throughout his life. To explain this simply, many of his colleagues throughout the years have described how, through a combination of charisma and force of will, Jobs could often bend the reality around him, compelling his teammates to accomplish tasks they previously thought impossible, or effectively sell a lofty vision that would have seemed hopelessly ambitious and even naive if presented by anyone else. Though it may be too nebulous for some, I believe that there was a highly spiritual aspect of this reality distortion field. Many Eastern spiritual traditions embrace the idea that thoughts, willpower, and meditative energy exert influence on the external world. Many modern gurus teach these ancient principles under popular names such as the law of attraction and the law of vibration. Jobs understood these principles long before they were part of the popular culture, and it can be argued that he utilized the power of his mind and will to help him build many of his endeavors. Of course, there were definite limits to this ability. As Walter Isaacson said, while most people would be hopelessly enthralled by Jobs' reality distortion field, there were also men like Bill Gates who were completely immune to it. Furthermore, in spite of his almost superhuman force of will, a number of his projects failed to reach fruition or the level of success he hoped. However, when one studies his life and sees the multitude of incredible achievements he contributed to the world, coupled with his lifelong study of spirituality, one cannot help but think that his spiritual knowledge and abilities contributed, at least in some degree, to the manifestation of his accomplishments. Furthermore, though Steve Jobs had a strong understanding of the logical mechanics behind running a company, he often relied far more on his intuition to make major decisions. Though many of the pragmatists of the world dismiss intuition as merely fanciful and whimsical and too fleeting to rely upon, it is fascinating how many other great minds also highly valued the power of intuition. As Einstein said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant." As Steve Jobs told Walter Isaacson, "Intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect, in my opinion. There are varying definitions depending on the discipline of study, but in general, it can be thought of as an instinctual, gut-level understanding of something that occurs without multiple steps of logical thinking." In the discipline of Zen Buddhism, intuition is considered a faculty of the mind that is beyond conscious thought, and they have certain techniques that allow one to train this ability. Intuition can be a concept that is difficult to grasp, as it is both a subconscious and superconscious mode of thinking that transcends the conscious mind and is a kind of spiritual knowledge. However, if you think back on your own life, you can think of situations that just felt right on a very subtle, instinctual level, and you couldn't exactly describe why, and later, this turned out to be the correct decision. Developing and trusting his intuition allowed Jobs to make faster and better decisions than his competitors. While developing products, he would often ask for multiple models of an upcoming product, and he made his decisions based on how he felt while holding, touching, and experiencing them, rather than on lengthy customer studies and the like. While relying so heavily on intuition goes against most conventional business wisdom, and while not all of his business decisions were slam dunks, on the whole, his decision-making ability was truly exceptional, especially when he matured as an executive. While much of the business world today is just starting to recognize the value of intuitive knowledge, Steve Jobs was very much ahead of his time in this regard, and in many ways, it was his intuition that guided Apple into becoming such an elegant brand. When most people think of Steve Jobs today, his paradigm-changing successes are usually the first to come to mind. But it is easy to forget that he experienced multiple devastating failures and challenges during his life, both personal and professional. Though he co-founded an industry-changing corporation at a young age, becoming a world-famous entrepreneur in only his 20s, he also faced major setbacks from a young age as well. Though the Apple I and Apple II were huge successes, his own project, the Lisa, was a commercial failure. Furthermore, though the original Macintosh was undeniably a great work of innovation and propelled the industry forward, it was not as profitable as Apple had hoped. Then, of course, he was fired from the very company he founded, and for a time he was actually considered to be a laughingstock in Silicon Valley. He went on to found Next, which produced some important technological innovations and software that were far ahead of their time, but failed to be a significant commercial success. However, when one zooms out and takes a broader view of his life as a whole, his failures were not a negative, but in the long term became powerful learning experiences and helped him to become the celebrated and respected CEO he was destined to become.
So why did Apple lose the PC war to Microsoft, and why did he get forced out, and why did Next not work if he was so good at all these things?
He wasn't then. I mean, seriously. The whole point is he learned from those things. Then by the time he came back to Apple, he had learned enough lessons about negotiation, about clarity, about how to interact with people that were stronger than they were initially.
I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the Valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith.
Jobs was always a visionary. However, in his early years, he was unable to make full and effective use of his genius due to his highly mercurial nature and inexperience. It was only after a series of failures that his genius was tempered by wisdom and discipline, allowing him to lead Apple to becoming one of the most valuable companies in the world. After listening to all of his interviews and speeches to research this film, one can really sense the brilliance and foresight he had, even as a young man in his 20s and 30s. However, there is something even far more impressive about hearing him speak as an older man. He has a much greater sense of gravitas, broad-mindedness, wisdom, and even a degree of humility. Our current educational system is very much adverse to mistakes and failures. In fact, society as a whole views failure as a very negative thing. As a result, most people play it safe all of their lives and are terrified of making mistakes. But as Steve Jobs said, this leads to a very limited life. Though Steve Jobs is celebrated for his many incredible successes, after studying his life, I believe that his ability to learn from his failures was one of his greatest and most overlooked strengths, and actually led to his later maturity as a leader, and hence the blockbuster products he created in the second half of his life. It takes incredible tenacity to overcome serious failures in life, and most people in the world never dare to try again after a major setback. But Steve Jobs was incredibly tough, and he kept on marching forward, even after he was fired from Apple, after the public failures of several major products, after Pixar failed to produce significant profits in its first 10 years, and after his cancer diagnosis. Furthermore, it takes a great degree of introspective ability and humility to learn from failures, and again, most people lack the insight into themselves and are also unable to set aside their pride. Though Steve Jobs is often known for his larger-than-life ego, I think that one of his most overlooked and underrated traits was his ability to temporarily set aside that ego and learn from each of the big setbacks during his life, each time becoming a better entrepreneur and also a better man. Hence, from the life of Steve Jobs, we can all learn that mistakes and failures are not to be feared, but to be embraced as critical learning experiences. I don't care who you are or what your background is, every human being on Earth will face failures during their lifetimes. The important question is, how do you deal with those failures? If we are able to draw the appropriate lessons from the mistakes in life, they could lead us to our greatest successes and allow us to become the leaders of the future. One of the things that made Steve Jobs very different from other tech industry titans, such as Bill Gates, is that Jobs was not focused primarily on hardware and specs and the utilitarian aspects of computing. Instead, Jobs was very much focused on the actual user experience. For example, while working on the original Macintosh, Jobs was obsessed with making the graphical interface a pleasant, fun, and easy experience.
If you go back about 100 years to the 1880s, there were approximately 25,000 trained telegraph operators in the United States. And there were some people that talked about putting a telegraph machine on every desk in America to improve productivity. Now, what those people didn't know was about the same time Alexander Graham Bell filed the original patents for the telephone. A breakthrough in technology. Because putting a telegraph machine on every desk in America to improve productivity wouldn't have worked. People wouldn't have spent the 20 to 40 to 100 hours to learn Morse code. They just wouldn't have done it. But with the telephone, within 10 years, there were over 200,000 telephones on desks in America. It was a breakthrough because people already knew how to use it. It performed the same basic function, but radical ease of use. And in addition to just letting you type in the words or click in the words, it let you sing. It let you intone your sentences to really get your meanings across. We are at that juncture in our industry right now. There are people suggesting that we should put a current generation box on everyone's desk to improve productivity. A telegraph, if you will. And we don't believe that. We don't think it will work. People will not read those damn 400-page WordStar manuals. They won't carry around these cards in their pockets with 150/WZs. They're not going to do it. And what we think we have here today, finally, is the first telephone. And in addition to letting you do the old spreadsheets and word processing, it lets you sing. It lets you make pictures. It lets you make diagrams where you can cut them and paste them into your documents. It lets you put that sentence in bold Helvetica or Old English, if that's the way you want to express yourself. What we think we've done is we've gotten us back on the track of letting us bring this technology not just to people that have them hooked up to these big blue boxes in Fortune 500 corporations. Sure, we want to sell our products to those people. But what we're really doing, the reason we're doing what we're doing, is because we want to bring this to tens of millions of people.
Some of the Macintosh team members were incredulous about why he pushed them so hard to build certain features, such as smooth scrolling and windows that could stack up on top of each other like virtual papers on a desktop, as well as a ball mouse that can move the cursor in all directions rather than just 4 directions. These features were tremendously difficult to execute during that time period, yet now the intuitive desktop analogy has become such an essential aspect of personal computing that we completely take them for granted and don't even give it a second thought. For Jobs, the computer was not just an expensive box that sat on your desk, and a mobile phone was so much more than just a cumbersome communication device. What does it feel like to use? Is it intuitive and fun? Is the device and operating system pleasing to the eye? Furthermore, whether it was during the early days working on the original Macintosh or towards the end of his life working on the iPad, he was absolutely obsessed with controlling the entire end-to-end experience for the customer.
And he wanted to engineer every aspect of the user experience, let's say for the iPhone, including what happened when you walked into the store. If the iPhone was sent to you or the iPhone was delivered to you or the iPod was delivered to you, what it looked like in the box, the detail of the box, what it was like to open the box, what you saw when you first opened the box, how you bought an application, how you connected to the network. I mean, every excruciating detail.
This always meant closely integrating hardware and software so that both could work better and create an effortless user experience. It also meant seamless integration between products, such as when Jobs insisted on ensuring flawless communication between the iPod and MacBooks via iTunes software. And perhaps in an even greater sense, Steve Jobs wanted to go as far as making products that inspired their users.
We want to bring the humanist element into these tools and not have them just serve our intellectual side, but have them serve some other sides of us as well. And so that's I think what we do particularly well.
Why do you think you need to put emotion into it now, though?
There's a lot of forces in life that tend to funnel us down into this institutionalized path. And where people, where people sometimes forget that that they're very unique and that they have very unique feelings and perspectives. And again, it's, the whole computer industry wants to forget about the humanist side and just focus on the technology. And a lot of our industry focuses just on more is better, more megahertz and megabytes and, speeds and feeds, we call it. But we think there's a whole other side to the coin, which is, what do you do with these things? Can we do more than just spreadsheets and word processors? Can we help you express yourself in richer ways, in your music, in your movies, in your photography, and these kinds of things that people want to do?
And going further along this concept of great user experience, he also always focused on making his products beautiful and elegant. Jobs himself was a fan of great art in its many forms, and he learned much from other artists. For example, he loved the classical music of composers like Bach, but also the best of classic rock, such as Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, and Joan Baez. He also drew immense inspiration from the beautiful products that came before him, such as Porsche and classic Mercedes cars, BMW motorcycles, Bose&Dorfer pianos, Bang & Olufsen audio equipment, and retro Braun electronics. He was so involved with aesthetics that his design tastes heavily influenced even the actual predominant shapes of Apple products. Since the Macintosh days, his favorite shape has always been a rounded rectangle, as he always found the shape to be very aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Take a step back and take a look over the entire Apple product line, and you realize just how ubiquitous rounded rectangles are within the Apple product line. From the iPod, to the iPhone, to the MacBook, and of course, even the app icons themselves. Furthermore, it's important to also note that the overall aesthetic of the main Apple products has evolved very little since Steve Jobs passed away, and yet the current Apple product line still looks very modern, and I think that this is very much a testament to how ahead of his time Jobs was in terms of design. Of course, this approach was applied to not only the MacBooks and iPod, but also the retail store itself. Though the Apple Store now has many imitators, such as Sony, Samsung, and even Tesla, it is important to keep in mind that it was a revolutionary concept and design at the time of its introduction, and Steve Jobs oversaw every aspect of it. The same philosophy that went into the design of the products went into the design of the store. When the first Apple Store opened, in many ways it felt more like an art gallery than a retail store, and the unique experience of walking through it and interacting with the products was quite revolutionary at the time. Though many critics at the time told him that retail stores for computers had all failed in the past, he pushed forward, undeterred. Together with a personally selected designer by the name of Art Gensler, Jobs labored tirelessly over the look of the stores, obsessing over every detail, including the signature glass staircases, the maple wood display benches, as well as the Pietra Serena sandstone flooring, which can only be sourced from one family-owned quarry in Italy. As stated earlier, Steve Jobs had a lifelong fascination with Eastern spirituality, especially Zen Buddhism, and in a broader sense, it can be said that Jobs wanted to align everything that Apple produced with the higher spiritual values of Zen. For Jobs, it was unacceptable to just produce utilitarian blocks with tangles of cables. Apple products had to align with the spiritual values he cherished, and this included simplicity, elegance, aesthetics, and a seamless, intuitive experience. Though his spiritual perspective may be too abstract for many business people to relate with, I truly believe that much of Apple's success under Jobs was due to him aiming towards higher, transcendent qualities and values, while his competitors were stuck on merely the pragmatic. While his competitors were focused on their pricing and how fast their computers were, Jobs wanted his products to be much more. He didn't want Apple to be another generic corporate behemoth. He wanted Apple to think different and to be different, to embody the values most important to him. Is it beautiful? Is it a pleasure to use? And of course, his even loftier and ambitious overarching goal was this: does it help make people more creative? I think this is a major reason why Apple has so many die-hard fans compared to other brands, and I think that much of Apple's future success depends on whether it can remain true to these higher values as it moves into the future. Though his collaborators and teammates are not nearly as famous as he is, Steve Jobs has never been the only brilliant mind or idea guy at Apple and Pixar. This is another facet of what made him a remarkable entrepreneur. He was a highly effective and unconventional leader who knew how to build world-class teams and then coordinate those teams to create something far greater than the sum of their parts.
And he was a very inspirational, charismatic leader that people believed in. They wanted to be on his team because his team was doing very important things.
In many bureaucratic large organizations, the leadership can often be insecure and feel threatened by smart people who question and challenge the norms. Thus, true meritocracies are actually quite rare in the modern corporate world, and advancement often favors politics over ability. Jobs did not have this problem and took a radically different approach. He actually only wanted the very best and most brilliant people around him at all times. In his words, he wanted to surround himself with only A players and no one else.
The greatest people are self-managing. They don't need to be managed. If once they know what to do, they'll go figure out how to do it, and they don't need to be managed at all. What they need is a common vision, and that's what leadership is. What leadership is having a vision, being able to articulate that so the people around you can understand it, and getting a consensus on a common vision. We wanted people that were insanely great at what they did, but we're not necessarily those seasoned professionals, but who had at the tips of their fingers and in their passion the latest understanding of where technology was and what we could do with that technology, and who wanted to bring that to lots of people. So the neatest thing that happens is when you get a core group of 10 great people, it becomes self-policing as to who they let into that group. So I consider the most important job of someone like myself is recruiting.
And though he is famous for being brash, abrasive, and brutally honest towards his colleagues, he never wanted it to be a one-way street, and specifically sought out people who were smart enough and strong enough to challenge him back on a daily basis. This created an environment that was certainly not for the faint of heart, yet this environment allowed the most talented people to come together, propose forward-thinking and sometimes even radical ideas, openly debate the merits of these ideas, and then allow the best ideas to win out.
Well, he would make the final decision, so he'd be the final arbiter. But his idea, now I've had discussions with Steve and Steve in meetings where he didn't agree in the beginning and he was persuaded, and and when he changes like that, boom.
This is what Tim Cook was saying last night.
He bang. I mean, he'll just move over to the best idea. What he wants is the best idea, the best product, the best movie, the best store, the best everything. And if he thinks someone's better than he is in a certain area, he's very good at listening. If he thinks you're full of it, he'll tell you.
And it was phenomenal to watch him because he really would flip. And you just saw this. And he would argue something, and you had to have the force of will, but he wanted somebody to argue back.
Yeah.
He didn't respect somebody if they didn't have a point of view and push it hard. And if they were right, he swift. I never saw anybody so much who understood there's no percentage in being wrong. Just right to his core, he understood that.
It wasn't this vanity. He was afraid that he was embarrassed about being on the wrong side of an argument for a while. He didn't care. All he cared about was the outcome of building the best product. Whose ever ideas went into it, he would just pick a menu of this best idea, that best idea, that best idea. Whether it's his or not, it didn't really matter.
Furthermore, he was also able to see the larger picture and hence able to integrate and coordinate the great ideas from various teams. For example, with the iPod, chief Apple engineer John Rubinstein came across a small hard drive that was still a prototype in development at Toshiba, and he had the idea of using it in a new type of music player, and Jobs was able to effectively combine this idea with the aesthetic designs and form factor developed by Johnny Ive. This is a big reason why Apple was able to outmaneuver and outcompete Sony. While companies like Sony were separated into large divisions that were siloed off and rarely communicated with each other, and sometimes even competed with each other, Jobs viewed Apple as one unified organism. He met daily with the heads of various departments and pushed them constantly to collaborate. During Apple's renaissance, the company was very much unified into one single front, with Jobs, of course, at the head of it, pushing a unified vision of where the company was going. Of course, he did much the same with Pixar, and even designed the main building to have a giant atrium, which he felt would encourage unplanned collaboration between the various departments, and it worked quite beautifully.
Or let's take something which you hear a lot about, and that is CEOs would say, my employees are my most valuable asset, and the culture is extremely important. But with Steve, he built a building. And the building, I think, is one of the most extraordinary work environments I've ever seen.
You're talking about the Pixar.
The Pixar building. And this was Steve's design, and it was very cultural. And it was because he thought about what it meant to say that your people were the best and the culture was the best. And it translated into an environment that was unlike what other CEOs would do, who would use the same words.
Along these lines, Jobs had a very different view on what constituted effective management compared to most large companies.
We went through that stage in Apple where we went out and we thought, oh, we're going to be a big company, let's hire professional management. We went out and hired a bunch of professional management. it didn't work at all. Most of them were bozos. They knew how to manage, but they didn't know how to do anything. And so if you're a great person, why do you want to work for somebody you can't learn anything from? And you know what's interesting? You know who the best managers are? They're the great individual contributors who never ever want to be a manager, but decide they have to be a manager because no one else is going to be able to do as good a job as them.
So it's very clear that one of the reasons for Apple and Pixar's success is that Jobs had the uncanny ability to assemble teams packed with brilliant people at both companies. But how was he able to recruit these people, especially since Jobs had a famous reputation for being impetuous, brazen, and very difficult to get along with? It is because though Jobs could be difficult to work with, he also created an environment where people could do their best work. It was an environment where innovative and unconventional ideas were not stifled. It was an environment where people got to work on cutting-edge products and people were actually expected to challenge the status quo. Thus, it was a place where the best people could learn, improve, and cultivate their talents. This is actually what drew Tim Cook away from his much safer job at Compaq to come work under Steve Jobs as Chief Operating Officer.
I had gotten a call several times from the search people that he had employed. And I kept saying no. I was at Compaq, I was happy, or thought I was, and they were persistent. And so I finally thought, I'm going to go out and take the meeting. Steve created the whole industry that I'm in. I'd love to meet him.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm honestly going into the meeting.
There's no downside to this.
Well, I'm just thinking I'm going to meet him, and all of a sudden he's talking about his strategy and his vision, and what he was doing was going 100% into consumer when everybody else in the industry had decided you couldn't make any money in consumer, so they were headed to servers and storage in the enterprise. And I'd always thought that following the herd was not a good thing. Yes, was a terrible thing to do, exactly. Right? It was, you're either going to lose big or lose, but those are the two options. He was doing something totally different, and he told me a little about the design, enough to get me really interested. And he was describing what later would be called the iMac. Yeah. And the way that he talked and the way the chemistry was in the room, it was just he and I could tell I can work with him. And I looked at the problems Apple had and I thought, I can make a contribution here. And working with him, and this is a privilege of a lifetime. And so all of a sudden, I thought, I'm doing it. I'm going for it. And you have this voice in your ear that says, go west, young man, go west. I was young at the time. But you come back and you try to do the things that people do with spreadsheets and stuff, and none of it makes sense. It didn't make sense. And yet, my gut said, go for it.
Lastly, it is very important to note that Steve Jobs was also an incredibly decisive leader. In most modern large organizations, big decisions require months upon months of endless committee meetings, and the end result is often a hodgepodge, mediocre solution produced by groupthink. Steve Jobs, on the other hand, was known for his incredible speed of decision-making and implementation. He did not rely on endless rounds of focus groups and committees to make major decisions for Apple. Instead, he relied upon his experience and carefully honed intuition to make his decisions, and then acted upon them immediately. For example, shortly after the release of the iMac, one of his designers proposed the idea of releasing them in various colors. Most other companies would have done months of customer surveys and held numerous meetings about the demand for the new colors and feasibility of such an action. However, as soon as Steve Jobs heard the idea, he loved it and rapidly set out to manufacture them. Another example is the iconic color of the iPod. The chief design officer of Apple at the time, Johnny Ive, proposed a radical idea. He wanted the iPod and headphones to be all white. This was unheard of for personal music players at the time, which were all either black or gray. However, Jobs immediately knew that this design would help the iPod stand out against the competition, and also recognized the sublime visual elegance of having an all-white iPod flowing into white headphones. Thus, there were no committee meetings. Jobs knew it was a powerful idea and gave the go-ahead. Jobs also made a similar decision with the scroll wheel on the iPod. the Apple design and engineering teams were uncertain of how to navigate the multitude of songs that would be stored on the iPod. After trying an early prototype of the scroll wheel, Jobs saw its potential and quickly selected it as a solution to focus on developing, even though such a technology had never been utilized on any other previous electronic device. The last important decision I want to discuss involves his work at Pixar. As with all of his products, Steve Jobs obsessed over Toy Story before its release and deeply believed in the quality of the film. Thus, he made the daring decision to take Pixar public a week after the release of the film. Even Pixar executives Ed Catmull and John Lasseter, veteran leaders themselves, were very nervous about the decision and considered it very risky, and thus preferred to wait a few more films before going public. Of course, the daring decision paid off for Jobs, and Pixar was the most successful IPO of the year, and it made Jobs a billionaire. More importantly though, the infusion of capital gave Pixar a powerful war chest, which allowed Pixar far more leverage in future negotiations with Disney and allowed it to operate with a much greater degree of autonomy. Leadership is not easy. In fact, of all of his talents, this one may be the rarest. Even among the countless large corporations of the world, world-class leadership is something very difficult to come by. Steve Wozniak and other Apple engineers had more technical knowledge than Jobs. Johnny Ive and many other designers who collaborated with Jobs had just as much aesthetic talent as he did. However, with the exception of Elon Musk, it is difficult to think of another entrepreneur of the modern era who had the same ability to coordinate the big picture and long-term strategy the way that Jobs did. Interestingly, this is actually the reason why Musk is still CEO of both Tesla and SpaceX, though he would prefer to devote much more of his attention to SpaceX. However, so far, Musk has still not found someone with the leadership ability to serve as CEO of a technology company as complex and cutting-edge as Tesla. In many ways, Tesla would require the next Steve Jobs, and so far, an individual with this level of leadership talent has not yet appeared on the world stage. Of course, one cannot speak about the genius of Steve Jobs without commenting on his abilities as a master marketer and salesman. Jobs' detractors always emphasize how he couldn't program and was not an engineer. And of course this is true. It was men like Steve Wozniak who were primarily responsible for the technical aspects of products like the Apple II. However, Jobs built something that was perhaps even more valuable. He built the Apple brand. He was the one who determined what the core values of Apple were, especially during its renaissance, but more importantly, he was able to communicate those values in a compelling way that the world just could not ignore.
We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
Jobs selected the agency Chiat Day and the director Ridley Scott to produce this legendary advertisement and fought to have it played during the Super Bowl, even when the Apple board members actually hated it. The advertisement was extremely effective at depicting Apple as the rebellious, young, iconoclastic warrior pitted against the dystopian corporate oligarchs at IBM and other legacy technology companies. Later, Jobs worked closely with the same agency to create the Think Different series of advertisements, which helped to revitalize the Apple brand upon his return. Though it is now remembered as one of the greatest marketing campaigns in history, at the time it was a bold and risky branding strategy. There were no mentions of hardware or software capabilities of the Macintosh computers. In fact, there was no mention of computers at all. But it did serve to associate the Apple brand with iconoclasts, rebels, and artists once again. Jobs was a master of branding, and for him, branding was about identifying the core values of a company and then broadcasting those values in a bold, artful, and unique way.
And we started working about 8 weeks ago. And the question we asked was, our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for? Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe. And we've had the opportunity to work with people like that. We've had an opportunity to work with people like you, with software developers, with customers who have done it in some big and some small ways. And we believe that in this world, people can change it for the better. And that those people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do.
Of course, his powerful public speaking and presentation skills must be mentioned as well. Though he is well known around the world as a master salesman, he never came across as cheesy or insincere during his speeches. I think the most important reason for this is because he had a genuine, passionate belief in his products, and the authenticity always came through in his presentations.
You got to see this thing in person, but I'll do the best I can with video. This is iMac. The whole thing is translucent. You can see into it. It's so cool. We've got stereo speakers on the front. We've got infrared right up here. We've got the CD-ROM drive right in the middle. We've got dual stereo headphone jacks. We got the coolest mouse on the planet right here. Come on around. All of the connectors are inside one beautiful little door here, the Ethernet, the USB stuff. Around the back, we've got a really great handle here. The back of this thing looks better than the front of the other guys, by the way. And then around the side. So let's take one more swing around it so you can see. This is what it looks like. And again, you've got to see one of these things in person.
Furthermore, he also had a talent for communicating the unique value and benefits of each of his products in very succinct, clever, and creative ways. Let's take a look.
But tonight, really for the second time ever, we'd like to let Macintosh speak for itself.
Hello, I'm Macintosh. It sure is great to get out of that bag.
This is their consumer notebook, and it looks like this, and you can just sort of see it's about that thick, and it's got some nice fans in the back, so you can keep an eye on them. And so this is what theirs looks like, and this is the new iBook. 1.3 inches thick. There it is. I don't think it could be more black and white.
But where is it, you ask? I've got a pocket right here. Now this pocket's been the one that your iPod's gone in, traditionally. The iPod and the iPod mini fit great in there. You ever wonder what this pocket's for? I've always wondered that. Well, now we know, because this is the new iPod mini. This is it. Let me take it out here. This is the new MacBook Air, and you can get a feel for how thin it is. Yeah, there it is. Look at this. Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. And the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone.
One of the most fascinating and unique aspects of Steve Jobs' character is that he always stood at what he called the intersection of the humanities and technology, and this powerful, synergistic mindset was infused into every major endeavor he undertook in life. It was also reflected in his choice of personal heroes, which included not only entrepreneurial titans like Hewlett, Packard, and Henry Ford, but also artistic titans such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Bob Dylan. In fact, as Walter Isaacson put it, much of Jobs' genius arose not only from the merging of art and science, but an even deeper belief that there should be no distinction between the two.
It's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. That it's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the result that makes our hearts sing.
But the key thing is that if you're going to make connections which are innovative, to connect 2 experiences together, that you have to not have the same bag of experiences as everyone else does, or else you're going to make the same connections, and then you won't be innovative, and then nobody will give you an award. So what you got to do is get different experiences than the normal course of events. And one of the funny things about being bright is everyone puts you on this path. You know, to go to high school, go to college. I've heard about some kid that's 14 on his way to Stanford, and that's great. That's sort of out of the ordinary. But you might want to think about going to Paris and being a poet for a few years, you know, or you might want to go to a third world country. I'd highly advise that, and see people and lepers with their hands falling off and all that stuff. It's very much so worth doing. You know, fall in love with 2 people at once. You know? Walt Disney took LSD. Do you know that? He did once. And that's where the idea for Fantasia came from. It's true. And you can go hear stories about all these people, and the key thing that comes through is that they had a variety of experiences which they could draw upon in order to try to solve a problem or attack a particular dilemma in a kind of unique way. And so one of the things that you'll get a lot of pressure to do is to go in one very clear direction and believe in God and all that other stuff. And that's great, but don't ever walk by a Zen Buddhist because of that. Sit down and talk and buy him lunch. And
Steve Jobs is celebrated as a genius today, not because he was the best in the world at one thing. He is celebrated because he was highly gifted, though not necessarily the best, in multiple areas. He was a polymath and Renaissance man, much in the tradition of his heroes Da Vinci and Michelangelo. In the modern era, specialists are often the most highly valued, and many believe that the more that one is able to niche down, the better. Of course, this is definitely one well-established pathway to success, especially in the medical field, and there can be dangers of becoming a jack of all trades and a master of none. However, that being said, I think that the modern era does not do enough to recognize the value of polymaths and people who have diverse skill sets. In the case of Steve Jobs, his various talents and interests allowed him to see the connections that others did not, and enabled fruitful cross-pollination between art and technology that changed our world. Perhaps you are someone with one major passion and interest in life. You will likely attain great success by homing in on that one thing. However, perhaps you are someone with as many as 3 or 4 major talents. Don't feel bad about devoting study and energy to all of them. As you can see from the life of Steve Jobs, the intersection of those fields of knowledge could very well lead to a great innovation that no one else is able to see. I personally believe that individuals with diverse skill sets will be more valuable during our modern digital age than even during the Renaissance itself, since our modern world, is so incredibly rife with rapid change, disruption, and an abundance of hidden opportunities. It is said that great chess masters have the ability to think several steps ahead. Thus, one general measure of intelligence is how far someone is able to think ahead, and many of the best leaders in history were said to think in terms of decades.
The picture up there was pretty much the way he was sitting there, kind of like with his fingers together. He did that a lot, and he would think. And he was looking not at the drawings on the board that I was pitching. He was staring off into the future.
There's an old Wayne Gretzky quote that I love. I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And we've always tried to do that at Apple, since the very, very beginning. And we always will.
Some people say, give the customers what they want. But that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. I think Henry Ford once said, if I'd asked customers for what they wanted, they'd have told me a faster horse. People don't know what they want until you show them. That's why I never rely on market research. Our task is to read things that are not yet on the page. In the case of Steve Jobs, he was definitely able to see further into the future than most others, and hence predicted the rise of personal computing, the rise of computer animation, as well as the rise of smartphones and tablets. More importantly, he had keen insights not only on what technologies would be developed in the future, but how they would serve humanity and integrate within society at large.
I remember reading an article when I was about 12 years old, I think it might have been in Scientific American, where they measured the efficiency of locomotion for all these species on planet Earth. How many kilocalories did they expend to get from point A to point B? And the condor one came in at the top of the list, surpassed everything else, and humans came in about a third of the way down the list, which was not such a great showing for the crown of creation. And but somebody there had the imagination to test the efficiency of a human riding a bicycle. Human riding a bicycle blew away the condor, all the way off the top of the list. And it made a really big impression on me that we humans are tool builders, and that we can fashion tools that amplify these inherent abilities that we have to spectacular magnitudes. And so for me, a computer has always been a bicycle of the mind, something that takes us far beyond our inherent abilities. And I think we're just at the early stages of this tool, very early stages. And we've come only a very short distance, and it's still in its formation, but already we've seen enormous changes. I think that's nothing compared to what's coming in the next 100 years.
In business, many executives are generals who are fighting the last war. This means that they rely on old and well-established strategies. In some industries where little change occurs, such as the soft drink business, this can work well enough. However, in any field that involves technology, this only ensures that you will be left behind. Steve Jobs deeply understood that in the technology business, innovating faster than your competitors is an absolute necessity. And this is why Apple and Pixar were always years ahead of everyone else while he was at the helm. Furthermore, it is important to also note that Jobs not only saw far into the future, but he also had very broad vision as well. That is, he was constantly aware of the larger strategy at play in his companies and how his various products intertwined with one another. For example, after developing the iPod, he immediately began to focus on bringing all of the various record labels on board to create the iTunes Store, as he knew that this would increase the value of his device exponentially. Shortly after releasing the iPad, he realized that most people now owned multiple Apple devices that were difficult to sync with one another, and hence quickly began to work on the iCloud. So Steve Jobs had both far-reaching and wide-ranging vision, and both contributed much to his success. Interestingly enough, when looking over his early interviews, one can see that this was an ability he had even very early on as a young man.
Do you know who Alexander the Great's tutor was for about 14 years? You know, Aristotle. And I read this, I became immensely jealous. And I think I would have enjoyed that a great deal. And through the miracle of the printed page, I can at least read what Aristotle wrote without an intermediary. And maybe if there's a professor, they can add to that, but at least I can go directly to the source material. And that is, of course, the foundation upon which our Western civilization is built. But I can't ask Aristotle a question. I mean, I can, but I won't get an answer. And so my hope is that in our lifetimes, we can make a tool of a new kind, of an interactive kind. And when I look at the personal computer, we're, as you know, living in the wake of the last revolution, which was a new source of free energy. And that was the free energy of petrochemicals, right? And it completely transformed society, and we're products of this petrochemical revolution, which is we're still living in the wake of today. We are now entering another revolution of free energy. A Macintosh, as you know, uses less power than a few of those light bulbs, and yet can save us a few hours a day or give us a whole new experience. And it's free intellectual energy. It's crude, very crude, but it's getting more refined year after year after year. And in our lifetimes, it should get very refined. And so my hope is someday, when the next Aristotle is alive, we can capture the underlying worldview of that Aristotle in a computer. And someday, some student will be able to not only read the words Aristotle wrote, but ask Aristotle a question.
Even at such a young age, he had almost preternatural foresight. Delving further into his example, it may be a shame that modern students cannot learn directly from someone like Aristotle. However, is it not astounding that, much in line with Steve Jobs' prescient musings, you are now able to learn from a digitized version of him, one of the greatest entrepreneurial minds in history? Though you are not quite yet able to ask an AI version of Steve Jobs a question, you can now stream an endless number of his interviews from anywhere on the planet, and do so using an iPhone, iPad, or Macintosh. It is undeniable that Jobs lived by his own personal philosophy, and he definitely left his dent in the universe. His products have changed our global society forever in so many ways. His products have changed the way we work, the way we spend our leisure time, the way we communicate, and even the way we form and maintain relationships. While it is undeniable that Jobs changed our world, not all of the changes have been positive. The iPhone is the most successful product in all of human history, and the ubiquity of mobile devices from the first world to the third world, coupled with the unstoppable rise of social media, has created a new digital layer of reality that is woven into every aspect of the real world. Because of this, more human time and attention than ever before is devoted to screens rather than being present to real-life interactions and experiences. That being said, I do believe that the positive effects of his creations very much outweigh the negatives. Many industries have been completely revolutionized by his work, and in some cases, his work has, both directly and indirectly, created entirely new industries altogether. The massive power of the various social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, are all reliant upon powerful and omnipresent smartphones as their hardware and operating system foundation. Due to his vision, computer animation is now an immensely popular and respected form of entertainment, and many of Pixar's films are rightly considered works of great art and major cultural contributions to our modern civilization. He helped to transform the computer from a hulking industrial monster into a friendly part of the home office, both functional and aesthetically beautiful. Lastly, with the advent of the iPhone and other mobile devices, he has changed the very structure of society and the human mind itself. In the modern era, almost every human being on Earth has a miniature supercomputer they carry with them everywhere and never strays more than a few feet from them at any given time. In this way, every human being has now become a functional cyborg and is augmented by a true bicycle of the mind during every waking moment. In some ways, this can be a negative, as you could easily waste hours on end on your smartphone, scrolling Facebook or Instagram, or watching YouTube prank videos. However, it also means that you have all of human knowledge, the modern Library of Alexandria, at your very fingertips, 24/7. It means that you have magic maps available to you at all times that tell you the most efficient ways of getting from point A to point B, all while taking traffic patterns into consideration. It allows creatives like myself to create passion projects and easily share them with the entire world in a way never before possible in the history of media. It means that if you can just put an iPad into the hands of a child who lives in a developing nation, he or she has access to a world-class education for absolutely free. I mean, isn't it amazing that today, even by owning even the most rudimentary of mobile devices, you can receive business mentorship from Steve Jobs himself with a simple touch of a screen, even while sitting on a bus or train. In many ways, I find Jobs very inspiring because he is an example of how much of an effect an individual human being, a single mind, a single soul, was able to influence the wider world at large. Most people tend to think of themselves as small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But studying the life of Steve Jobs and his advice, it becomes apparent that each of us matters more than we realize and has far greater influence upon the world than we realize. Just like Jobs, each of us has a unique contribution or gift we are destined to endow upon the world, and no matter how outwardly big or small, it will have a ripple effect beyond anything we could ever imagine. If there is just one thing I want you to take away from this film, it is that each of us has the power to change the world for the better, and like Steve Jobs, we just need to have the conviction, the courage, and the tenacity to do so. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I had a lot of fun writing it and putting it together, and put a lot of dedication and effort into it, so hopefully you had a really valuable experience watching the video. To research the video, I read the Walter Isaacson biography and listened to most of Steve Jobs' interviews, taking a lot of notes along the way. However, that being said, I am by no means a fanatic Apple fan who knows everything about the brand, and I actually edited the video on a Windows laptop. Thus, if you do happen to be a very serious fan of Apple, please feel free to comment below and share any additional insights you might have that I didn't cover in the documentary. Furthermore, there was just so much great material that I came across during my research that I wasn't able to include it all in the video. And so if you're interested, I will post many more of Steve Jobs' inspiring quotes on my website, as well as an essay version of the script if you'd like the information as a reference. And I will place the link below. In many ways, though I like using Apple products, I'm much more fascinated by Steve Jobs himself, especially his artistry, spiritual sensibilities, and just the incredible courage with which he led his life. And of course, though I really admire the Apple brand and what they've achieved, and it is rightfully one of the most valuable brands on earth, as they move beyond a $2.5 trillion market cap at the time of this video and gain almost infinite power, I do think they need to be very careful moving forward not to become the very thing they swore to fight against in their 1984 advertisement. My goal is to create a video that would be tremendously valuable for entrepreneurs and artists of all experience levels, and hopefully you found it to be so. I personally learned so much about both art and entrepreneurship from studying the life of Steve Jobs in detail, two topics that I am just immensely passionate about. I've watched his Stanford graduation speech many times over, and I have to say that the wisdom that he shared in that speech just really resonates with me so much and has actually influenced some of the rather unconventional and bold decisions I've recently made in my life. If you found value in the video, consider browsing my catalog of videos to see if you'd like to subscribe. The topics are very diverse and cover not only interesting philosophical topics like this one, but also a lot of self-development and travel. That being said, as I continue to build out the channel, my goal is that all the videos are unified by a commitment to quality, continuous improvement, and of course, always putting in the work to ensure that each and every video has immense educational and entertainment value for my awesome subscribers. Thanks again, everyone.